nice article in the Managing Madrid blog. Wonderful lads that do a great job there. And it's worth reading about that man there. Karim Benzema needs to rest, and the numbers reveal why.
Times ended up almost looking like a 6-3-1. Some very good writing about that on the Managing Madrid website. Great podcast as well. Of course, Fede Valverde was a huge part of the equation.
Hello, everyone. Recording this on a Sunday, the day after Barcelona just embarrassed Real Madrid. Now, today, I really feel strongly after the Clásico, and I felt for the whole season that this squad was going to have some trouble going into the season, and I figured Carlo would be the one who would have to make certain adjustments to get certain players playing better if they didn't look like they could fulfill the roles that we need from them in Toni Kroos's absence, which is a lot more responsibility and leadership on the ball. And so far this season, just to set the stage, Luka Modric has been our best playmaker. When he's on the field, we seem to have a chance. We kind of control games. When he's not there, things fall apart. Arda Güler, who was supposed to be one of the pieces who can kind of play in a deeper role, who told Kian Sobani, and when I was in the room when he said that Güler can play in a midfield three in preseason in Chicago. And we saw it in training, but we're not seeing enough of it in games. The circulation's gone bad. Yes, there are issues with the players, but this episode is to focus on what is going wrong from a coaching perspective. Is there a lack of attention to detail? What more can Carlo do? And is there a chance Ancelotti has a happy ending at Real Madrid? Or is this going to be somewhat bittersweet ending where he ends without any major trophies? Mazen, welcome. Last time Mazen was here, he gave great insight earlier in the season into our offense. I think it was an episode called How Can Ancelotti Evolve the Offense? So Mazen, what's up, man? How are you feeling right now?
Good. I think in terms of the season, it's definitely been a great disappointment so far, coming off a Champions League and a league, and it's particularly waiting 7-8 years for Kylian Mbappe, and so far it's not really gone as planned. The positive side, of course, is it's still not the knockout stage in the Champions League. It's 6 points in La Liga, which you still have the game in the Camp Nou to cut that down to 3. And the Copa del Rey hasn't started, so everything's still hands on deck. But most definitely, we're going to have to see changes as soon as possible if this team is to defend one of the two major titles that they won last season.
Yes, definitely. So if we got to split up football into all the different phases, we're going to cover each phase of the game in the sport, whether that's build up or high pressing or block defending. And we're going to go over what we're doing, what we're trying to do, and also what needs to be done for it to be effective. So just a look at the details, basically. Pay attention to the subtle details in each phase, not just zoom out and be oh, the results aren't good, we look horrible. Well, it's really been different game to game. Some games, Modric plays, progression's okay, maybe out of possession we're not good. We saw yesterday first half, out of possession, I'd say pretty good out of possession, honestly, but in possession, complete mess. If Modric was there, he probably makes one of those through balls to Mbappe. He's not there, nothing works out. So let's start with I'd like to start with out of possession, because this is the one that Carlos never gotten right, and I think people need to see this. Out of possession, proactive pressing. Let's start there, Mazen, because possession's interesting, but that was the theme of our last episode, so I want to start more here. I guess Carlo's never been good out of possession, but right now he has a team that can be elite out of possession, and it just feels like he's not a Klopp or a Pochettino who knows how to take these guys and turn them into duel-winning machines. And it feels like sometimes we selectively press, but it's never consistent. And yesterday when we went down 2-0, we knew we can't press, so that's why we gave up. I think that's why they gave up, because we know we haven't been coached to press. When we press small teams, we get ripped apart. At 2-0, a high press is just suicide, and we lost 4-0 anyways. So what do you think is missing? I guess Carlo's not a pressing coach, but what do you think is missing?
So I think the last 3-4 matches since the international break, we've moved towards more of this high man-to-man press lately. You've seen it yesterday, like you raised. But in discussions privately yesterday, I kind of raised the fact that there's certain mental traits that come with pressing intensively, and I think we're attempting to be more proactive, like you said, off the ball. But when the spaces are so large, it's a little difficult. Like for example, last game yesterday, there's multiple sequences where Rudiger and Militao they're quick to jump onto Lewandowski and onto Dani Olmo and onto Pedri, but you see with Ferland Mendy and Lucas Vasquez, they're not as quick. They don't have as much trust, sort of, in taking the offside trap or holding it. You've seen with I think it was the first goal, was it, where both Ferland Mendy and Lucas Vasquez were about 2 meters deeper than Rudiger and Militao, while the rest of the team was on the opposition side of the half. Was it the first goal?
It was the first goal with Lewandowski, but also there was a moment later in the game. I think it might have been Rafinha.
Yeah, Rafinha. Sure.
Yeah, same thing. It was Vasquez, I think, was way behind the other three.
And then it also, in terms of the first line, there's two aspects to it, right? First of all, you have your trade-offs. You're running a lot of vertical jumps with Rudiger and Tchouaméni and Valverde and Eder Militao down the middle, but a lot of them are resulting into these sort of situations like the one we raised with the Rafinha and Lewandowski goal, because Kylian Mbappe and Vinicius Jr. are instructed to perhaps hold their position and not be as intense out of possession. Particularly Vinicius Jr. Kylian Mbappe, of course, he has sort of a reputation out of possession, but Vinicius Jr., if you remember back to the Zidane days, he was one of our more hardworking pressing players. So if you're not if you're not willing to give up that rest attack, is it necessarily worth it to have Tchouaméni and Valverde as aggressive, where now you're asking for a lot of rotations, especially on a man-to-man level, with your two fullbacks who already kind of struggle with defending on a team level? And then the second thing was rather the mental side of things. First of all, when you're defending on a man-to-man basis consistently, there's a lot of concentration required, right? You can't have a single lapse. It's especially when you're going up against what's frankly been the best attack in Europe this season. And there's also another aspect that I raised with Kylian Mbappe. He's not somebody who's ever really worked out of possession, but when you ask Kylian Mbappe to maybe execute these 2-3 meter presses, and then he's aware about, oh, okay, the rest of my team's 5-10 meters behind me, there's no one backing the press, is he going to feel incentivized to execute the same action the next time around?
Yeah, for sure. So definitely agree about how the vertical jumps are needed because they don't press the front two don't press. The other thing is like high pressing itself. Like if you go look at like coaches who do press, they learn it like explicitly at some point, either as a player or as a coach. Like I feel like you don't just figure out how to coach a press by like sitting down and going on your laptop. I mean, some people can. Maybe you can. I mean, you can. Maybe I can. Like there are people who can. But my point is, at the highest level, when you're coaching, like pressing is something that came onto the scene while Carlo was a coach. He was coaching at Chelsea when Guardiola really came onto the scene.
Also,
And
I'm
yeah,
sorry to cut
go
you,
ahead.
but I think Ancelotti played under I forgot his name, but the old Italian coach at AC Milan.
Arrigo Sacchi.
Yeah. I think Ancelotti played under him, and that was one of the big revolutions in terms of off the ball pressing.
It was. So Milan was I've read about Milan and I need to jog my memory here, but my understanding is Milan, yes, they were about pressing, and I think Sacchi was the one who had the famous quote like if you have four like elite defenders organized, they can defend five attackers even if they're outnumbered, is what he said. And was Sacchi not like weren't they a bit defensive? Like they had seasons where they only scored 40 goals even though they quote unquote pressed. Was it not a bit of Catenaccio as well?
Yeah, as far as I know, I'm not necessarily a guy who goes into football history that much, but yeah, they were more focused on sort of organizing defenses. Because if you look at maybe total football with the Netherlands, it was a bit more chaotic, and so it kind of brought a level of organization.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I just know they won like leagues in Serie A, scoring like 40 goals. Like they just won 1-0 like every game. They beat Barcelona in the 1994 final 4-0, I believe. And it was just a shock because they had basically scored a goal a game the whole season. 4 goals in a game was unprecedented. So yeah, so I mean, Italy has like Italian coaches in general have rarely been very aggressive. Even like Antonio Conte, who does implement more positional elements to his game, maybe more aggressive ones. He's still a mid-block guy when it comes down to it. And Max Allegri, horrible to watch at Juventus, mid-block guy. I guess maybe Mancini is one of the more proactive Italian coaches. I don't know if you have anything to add about him, Mazin, Mancini specifically.
No, but yeah, I get your point. It's mainly maybe the newer coaches like Motta and De Zerbi who've kind of revolutionized Italy in that sense.
Yep, and Mata, very young. You need these younger guys who have played. He's played with Verratti at PSG, I believe. He's seen the game evolve. And so Carlo comes just from a different era, and he's not like a dinosaur in the sense that there are timeless principles about the game he understands. So if you give him a quality team, he's not going to go screw it up that easily in many cases at least. Like he's not going to get in the way of the players. I'll put it that way. And he comes from a time when organizing defense was the main like call of action, and attackers were free flowing. They were creative. You let them do what they want to do, and that's how he's been his whole career. So, like, from a pressing perspective, like you see, like Arteta's or Klopp's or Guardiola, like all these presses, they're things that are very intentional. And like Arteta was under Guardiola when it happened. Enrique is from that same coaching tree. There's a tree which you learn it from, and I feel like when you see those teams press every game, you see them like cut off every angle. Like they're confident. Like when the striker goes, even if the other players are away, like by the time he gets to his guy, everyone's cutting off the angles they need to, and that's never happened here.
There's also the aspect of continuity, right? We could obviously in any field break things up into certain phases, like you said, but with football, it is still a continuous game unless it's a dead ball situation. And when you talk about Arsenal or Manchester City, these are teams that are a lot close packed in possession than say what Real Madrid is, and so it's a lot easier for them to counter press off the get go. Like a lot of times, you'll see maybe Federico Valverde do a 20-30 meter sprint just to back the press, and so there's the aspect that there's trade-offs, right? If you're gonna want to press at the level that Real Madrid's been attempting to move towards since the international break, there's also the trade-off of okay, how willing are you to allow Vinicius and Mbappe to, be 20-30 meters off the second line for the counterattack, or how willing are you to move Rudiger and Militao to more aggressive positions so you could kind of squeeze the opposition? And so I think right now we're sort of in a phase where maybe Ancelotti's recognized, okay, we're not going to have these 5-10 minutes of control the same way off a mid-block where perhaps with Toni Kroos and Luka Modric in his prime did, right, with the last Champions League and then the one in 2022. But it's also at the same time where he's not willing to give up the trade-offs required to move towards that. He's clearly not willing to get Mbappe off the last line or get Vinicius more working a bit harder out of possession. And he's also never really been, maybe unless Real Madrid's down a goal or two, willing to move Rudiger and Militao squeezing up the pitch the way you might see Saliba and Gabriel at Arsenal.
Interesting. Yeah. So you feel like he only pushes them up when we're down. Like you feel like he just doesn't like he instructs them to sit deep. He doesn't like the offside trap and none of that.
I think in certain games, like perhaps yesterday, it was a bit more obvious, right? But in general, yes, and part of that does come off the fact we're very aggressive with our passes, right? There's a lot of time we play the first forward pass, and of course, if you're kind of quicker with your actions, it's a little bit harder for your team to move as a unit. So I think right now it's about continuity, right? You can break up these things theoretically into different phases, but in implementation, you need continuity, right? You can't you can't play the first vertical pass every time and then expect Rudiger and Militao to be there for the counter press or to be there for to sustain possession. So I think right now we have a team that nearly in every single phase has an idea that that doesn't that doesn't connect back.
Yeah. So the idea out of possession has been slowly to try and press a little more, um, and win the ball back. Uh, I guess yesterday the idea was to sit back, and it worked, except for that moment, like you said, when the fullbacks were hesitant and didn't know if they should step up at the same time. Um, so yeah, for sure, there's an element of he has like good intentions in every phase, but he's not willing to sacrifice or implement all the details needed to successfully execute even one thing. Outside, maybe I would say the transition offense in the second phase, I think, has been good. As like getting into the final third. Once we're there, we screwed up. But I think we do a decent job, and I think that's why we're playing too many forward passes because we do a decent job accessing Mbappe, Vinny, because they're always open and so fast. I guess so that takes us to in possession. So we talked about the start of the season. You said too many forward passes. We need more detailing where we exchange shorter passes and free up guys in actual space, and we work on moves pre-planned that actually geometrically guarantee they get released into space. What do you think has changed now? Like, do you think he's increasingly gone to a more vertical style?
I think since the first Atalanta game, I raised that we have a lot of issues with the first pass out of winning the ball back. And for example, against Atalanta, a lot of the times, the first pass we played would be backwards. It wasn't very aggressive, and so that allowed them to settle into what they wanted, which was a man-to-man press without having to pressure the ball, which in essence was, oh, Thibaut Courtois has the ball. Yesterday, the pass was very vertical, like we both raised. And the issue with that is Barcelona, they want to defend vertically, right? They don't want to defend side to side. In fact, matter of fact, they don't want to play any other game side to side. It's Hansi Flick. So I think one of the big issues that we have is recognizing what teams want to do out of possession, and when you win the ball back, what does that mean, right? So a lot of times right now, perhaps we're playing into the hands of opposition presses. We'll play the sideways pass when that's when they want that. We'll play the vertical pass when that's what they want. So it's it's an aspect where it does take. It's something you have to implement principles, right? Ancelotti's talked all season about he wants his team to play quicker to Kylian Mbappe and quicker to Vinicius Jr. But at the same time, from a game to game basis, you have to recognize that what does the opposition want you to do? Barcelona wants you to stay, frankly, as vertical as can be. They want to attack vertically, they want to defend vertically. So it's game by game. We have to see those kind of small adjustments, and yeah.
That brings up a great point. Great point about like how we're just playing into their hands, and this is just a classic issue for players who are skilled. When you reach this highest level, like if you're so skilled that you can dribble out of a press, pass out of a press, like Camavinga or Fede in cases can dribble out of the press. He can pass. Chouameni can pass, but when you're skilled enough to see everything, and you get nervous maybe if guys coming near you, that's where coaching can help. I think a great example of a player who's developed um, in possession, and I hate to admit it, but like he is much better in possession. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. Is Mateo Kovacic under Pep Guardiola? I feel like he's an embodiment of a player. Like if you took that Kovacic and put him in this midfield, he would struggle. He wouldn't be good in possession. He probably wouldn't help us control games the way maybe he would, but like if you take Chelsea Kovacic and put him here, or if you took our like Kovacic when he was younger, didn't really thrive here. When you look at it, what happened at City, like his decision making is all there now. Like he's not like Rodri. His shooting isn't as good as Rodri, and he's not as ideal in the final third. But he's like a security blanket in the first two phases. What do you think about that? Like, is that the sort of like? I guess like what I'm saying is I think that's a sort of development we need from Carlo. Like what we've seen from Kovacic before and after Pep is the perfect example.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I also buy to the fact that Pep Guardiola has a lot of options for his players nearby, right? So it comes back to the continuity thing, where our team's moving in and out of possession vertically, right? And it's creating these.
You still there? Hey Mazin, I'm just gonna message you. You got muted, but can't hear you. I'll tell you if I can hear you again. Just feel free to talk whenever. Um, Unmute your mic. So the
Apologies. Did you hear what I was saying?
I hear you now. Okay, so
Okay.
back to your point. Yeah. What were you
Yeah,
saying?
sorry. I think someone just called me, so took my mic out. I was saying that at Manchester City, Kovacic's decision makings, it's not necessarily made for him. I think that's something where people get wrong with Pep Guardiola. He's not telling you play A to B, but he gives you the options that simplify your decision making, right? And that's something like we raised in the first episode that Real Madrid lacks. So you can't necessarily expect Federico Valverde, for example, right? He had this huge problem yesterday where he kept on playing these switches to Lucas Vasquez, and none of them were accurate. But again, if that's the only open pass he makes, what's the decision he's going to make? If the only pass Rudiger has is a quick pass to Chouameni, and then the next pass is a quick pass to Vinicius, what type of decisions are these players going to make? So it's not as easy as Carlo Ancelotti, and this is why I've been so frustrated with him, continually pointing out intensity and the speed of pass is you're saying these things, but it's not as simple as that. A player is gonna make the decision that's available to him, and so it's not as simple as playing a match of FIFA and then maybe pulling your joystick back. So we on a team level, if if Angelotti wants a more intense team, if Angelotti wants a team that's quicker with its passes, not as sluggish, those options have to be there.
Yeah, and that's where he needs to teach his players to move without the ball. And this is something that again Pep does really well, teaching them where to move off the ball. Carlo is really good at getting his best players on the ball and in a dynamic where his best movers also receive off the ball. And that's what he's been trying so far this season. It's been get Bellingham on the ball, get Mbappe, Vinny moving, access them is the goal. But like to control a game, you need to actually coach it a lot more, like how to actually stand out of possession. What were you gonna say?
I was saying that's a good point because it's something we've been lacking a lot with Kylian Mbappe, where he almost seems clueless in terms of picking up non-verbal cues, right? You see, yesterday he was way too quick off his line. Every time Lucas Vasquez received the ball, he automatically, thought of, okay, this is my time to trigger the run, while Lucas Vasquez, took two or three more touches. And this just something. There was one pass. It was very similar to the goal Bellingham scored against Girona, if you remember, where he almost compromised because he didn't read the cue of the outside of the right touch from Vinicius Jr. And it's something that we struggled to develop, which was very important to the success of Vinicius and Bellingham last season, which is these non-verbal cues of what is each player picking up from another.
Yeah, and the extent to which it's been lacking with Mbappe is definitely shocking, but it's also somewhat expected. This isn't a guy who is a traditional nine, and you're just throwing him into a team that lost Joselu, that has played with a reference nine for 15 years, that just lost Joselu and had Jude hurt, and you just have him go play wherever. It's not working, and um, I guess like, and so, um, do you think, and so you feel like in possession, do you think he wants all these ball losses? Do you think it's something he's accepted, or do you think it's just like you think he's okay with the trade off of we lose the ball more, but we play vertically, and the final third is just not gone right? Or or what? What do you think's going on?
I think it's again the idea of maybe contradicting ideas within each phase, where he's trying to implement certain things, but he's not willing to give up the trade off for that. Like we talked with the press, it's similar here with attack, and a lot of times the solutions he's tried to come with have been very simple, right? So He moved Tchouameni to center back, for example. Kylian Mbappe lately has been playing a lot more off the last line. Perhaps during the first weeks he was dropping a little deeper, but clearly the issue is it's a lot bigger than that. Than simply saying, okay, how are we gonna change a single player's role? Vinicius Junior has been moved closer and closer and closer to the middle of the pitch lately, right? And um, so I think again, it's for Ancelotti, he's gonna have to sit down and say, okay, what is he willing to trade off? Is it out of possession? Is he willing to let teams dictate the game like he did, like, for example, against Manchester City? That's I don't think Manchester City at Etihad was a great performance, but that's what I mean in terms of that match. He was willing to give up Vinicius Junior being an outlet, and this is something that he needs to do, right? Against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge, when Chelsea were the defending champions, you've seen how he was again willing to give up a bit of control in the midfield by moving Valverde. Valverde, I think that's actually what the intro talks about. The 6-3-1 he played that match against Chelsea, and so it's about what are you willing to trade off, and you can't just have contradicting ideas within each.
Yeah, for sure. The thing you said about City really stood out. Yeah, that definitely hits home. Like, he accepted that we can't have it all that game, but he doesn't accept that every game. And the other thing is, like, okay, so we know that in build up, the players, the most fundamental problem, I think, out of everything, even if you don't fix the press and the block, if you actually get these players not choosing the same pass that that the other team makes available, but you actually teach the team to move and make options open, that improves things. I think what's impressive is that how often we get Vinny or Mbappe running near the box, whether our build-up looks good or not. Like, it just happens eventually in a game because they're so fast. If the opposition commits a lot, we're going to access them. It's hard to box us in the whole game because he wants those outlets. And if they're not going to press us, they're still really devastating in terms of their movement. And I feel like where it breaks down with Mbappe is, like, really as he gets near the box. As you said, the nonverbal cues are a
Yeah.
problem.
Sorry to cut you off, but
Yeah.
if you remember, actually, the second goal Vinicius scored against Dortmund, Mbappe almost blocked that shot.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that ties into once they get into the box, I think there are two problems. Not only the nonverbal cues, but we've lost one option which we had for a decade, which is not crossing. So you don't have the aerial ball available anymore in the final third. And so what happens then is you're trying to play everything to feet. Maybe you're trying to do little dinks like Messi, Neymar did, where you dink it over them, little chips past the defenders, but you're not really playing in the air anymore. That's what a lot of our players have been used to: circulate and then cross. So the end point of our circulation isn't gone, and so we're trying to play more centrally, or we're trying to do more cutbacks, which is just not something we're used to doing the way we are now. And it feels like we don't have enough width, or if we do have the width, we're not comfortable doing the cutbacks. And part of it is the nonverbal cues, but I feel like there's nobody pinning. Everyone's like coming to the ball or expecting the pass to come to them. There's a lack of pinning, or when the pinning happens, the right pass doesn't come. But I think, like, if we had Joselu right now, this whole season, I think our offense would have been like literally 50% better, like per game. I think 30 to 50% better. Especially including when you count for his minutes, I think we would go crazy. And even last season, the minutes with Joselu, Carlo used them really effectively. The plus minus with Joselu and Brahim on the court, on the field, was the highest of any player on the team. And obviously they were used as subs when we were chasing games. So the plus minus is higher. And both the plus minus goal difference and the XG difference was the highest when they were on the field. But it just shows like how well he was used. And I think this season, not having 9 has killed us. Like, Mbappe, and I think, again, a more sophisticated coach maybe gets someone pinning. But with Carlo, it's always get our best players on the ball, get our best off-ball runners moving. But where's the connection, or where, like, there's not enough options if you can't cross it. And I don't know. What are your thoughts, like, in terms of the lack of a 9 really killing Carlo himself, because he's just like used to letting the 9 go pin and they figure it out.
There's different ways though, and this is the thing, right? You still have Tchouameni, you still have Jude Bellingham, and you still have I guess Antonio Rudiger is a little tough to get into that situation, but you still have Valverde who has a shot from the 18-yard box. So, what kind of inventive solutions are you going to look at, right? So, like you raised, perhaps you don't have Benzema or Jose Lu just to cross towards, but if you perhaps pack the box a bit more, right? Take the Kylian Mbappe goal against Atalanta, where he kind of did the feint back, right? And that happened a lot with Bellingham in terms of, okay, maybe do you have Kylian Mbappe and Rodrigo maybe decoying runs to open up a cross for Chouameni or Jude running into the box, or perhaps a cutback, right? With Federico Valverde, because we do have a lot of shooters in that zone with Valverde and Chouameni. So it's being inventive, and it's also about in terms of pinning. We've played with almost this full sense of width this season, where a lot of times we'll move Vasquez or earlier Carvajal on the right side up, and then Ferdinand Mendy or Fran Garcia on the left side. But in reality, all our, you know, outside threats, Rodrigo and Kylian Mbappe and Vinicius are packed really close together in the middle. So again, it's about Carlo Ancelotti kind of accepting, okay, I don't have Jose Lu, but what's a new solution that I could do? And we've just not seen that.
Yeah, I agree fully. It's because like Carvajal gets the ball on the touchline. He's used to seeing Benzema, Ronaldo. He sees Mbappe running. He's like, okay, I'm not crossing it to you. And then, or like he thinks, which he didn't ever do before. Before, like he would just see Benzema and play the pass sometimes. So he thinks, and on the left, less is said about Mendy, the better. And like, see, the problem is, so like you need those guys to be primarily working on your rest defense. Then that's what you want them doing. You want your Mbappe, Vinny, Rodrigo peeling wide. Does that mean you want Bellingham crashing the box? These guys peeling wide
Yeah.
cutbacks?
I think if there's one positive we could take away from, what was frankly two garbage performances against Dortmund and Barcelona, is the consistency that we're able to kind of pull out the first two lines of the press, and then now you're able to got caught outside. What was it, 8 times? But point is, now you're getting Kylian Mbappe running in behind more. So again, it's about, like I said, continuity, right? So if perhaps what's more static play in the final third is not working, what can you do in build up to create the same situations like the Vinicius goals or the 20 offsides Kylian Mbappe caught last time? How can you create these situations more often?
Yeah, and that requires a level of deliberation, more specification that Carlo doesn't love doing. He doesn't like telling his players, "Hey, like," and it's not even about like. I think that it's a level of attention to detail. It's not that he knows the players, like if you give him, he'll go over the film and tell the players, hey, slow it down here, speed it up here. It's about giving them all the parameters and practicing it again and again to where it becomes second nature for them, which he doesn't know how to do.
It's not. It's also actually a motivation factor. I think from the 2021-2022 season, there was a Real Madrid documentary about the Champions League, and Carlo Ancelotti talked actually a bit about how not being obsessive and perhaps not having the same attention to detail is what's allowed him not to burn himself out, perhaps the way we see someone like Thomas Tuchel, for example, burn himself out a lot, or even Pep Guardiola after Barcelona.
Yeah, that could be a factor. And we also know that they wanted another assistant coach and they were denied that opportunity. I think they had a good quality assistant coach who was hired from England. And then because of some stupid regulation nonsense, yeah, stupid work rules, whatever, dumb stuff. And so he couldn't come and coach us, even though he got his dream job. And so that's definitely a factor. I know David Ancelotti is the one who does more of the details. He's like, as his son, he's grown up watching Carlo, and he's grown up like consuming the game as a younger person. So
There's an issue with David Angelotti that persists. Like, you look at Lilo at Pep Guardiola at Manchester City, or even some of the assistants that Thomas Tuchel's had in the past. These are people who oppose their ideas, right? We have, with David and Carlo Ancelotti, we kind of have two people with similar philosophies, and they don't necessarily kind of question each other as much as perhaps you see what Pep Guardiola's assistants do.
I wouldn't use Tuchel as the best example in that. I think his knockout coaching is great, but he's like he's not the best example, I think. But I do think Pep is a great example. Well, with Pep, I know he Lilo wrote that one article that on for the Athletic or whatever that's so famous, but how does he oppose Pep's ideas? Because I always got the vibe that he is actually a more sophisticated endpoint of what Pep has always known he wants to be, if that makes sense.
I don't necessarily think it's about 100% injecting ideas, but it's just in general. Usually, when you're kind of in a field, right, you'd like to have maybe one or two people kind of question or challenge what you have, and I feel like with David Ancelotti, we lack that, and perhaps that's why we tried to bring in that other assistant coach like you raised.
I wonder if it's also just a case of I don't think that's the case. Like I don't think it's I don't think we're trying to bring one in because they don't feel there's enough disagreement. In that I think David does go. Zidane had a guy too who did the details. I forget his name, Borges or something. But
The bald guy, the other bald coach,
some guy, yeah. He was
yeah.
bald. I think he had glasses. So he was Zidane knew what he wanted, and this guy would go figure out how to implement the mid blocks, a lot of the Zidane mid blocks, and even the in possession positional stuff that became very prevalent the second time around. That was that guy. And I think David, especially like the blocks, like the trade-offs. I think part of the like Vinny defending might have been David. I think he really understands how to execute certain game plans, especially defensively, where Carlo's never been strong. But in this case, I think why they wanted another assistant is a lack of you need a lack of enough film watching. Like you need people who can watch and explain what's happening on videos in games across Europe or in Real Madrid games to the players, and you need enough brain power to actually digest the information. So I wonder if there's not enough but you need a coaching staff is going to go digest information. They're going to update their knowledge. They're going to watch other teams in the league. They're going to scout opposition, but they're also just going to spend time just pondering things. They need time to bounce ideas off each other. And I think if you don't have enough brain power, either the creative element or the research element will suffer, which might be the problem. But I just bring that up because I thought about this too when we didn't get him, and I was kind of worried because I'm like, why do you so explicitly want him? You definitely know you're short on brain power right now. You just don't have enough mental hours. Everyone's too busy with other tasks.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. You definitely I would say, follow kind of the insides of Real Madrid a bit more than I would. So you'd be a bit more knowledgeable in that aspect. But again, it's not to criticize Ancelotti, right? He's been coaching for 30 years. That obviously takes a lot of innovation at the end of the day. But yeah.
Totally. So we talked about how the final third combos need to get better. I'm not going to share the screen this time, but Jamie Hamilton on Twitter, sometimes he's put out great videos of how Mbappe doesn't know when the tabella is on the one-touch pass. So yeah, we've been over the final third. We've been over build-up. And in possession.
Actually, maybe the middle third, because that was really shocking. I think, all right, Hansi Flick's a fantastic coach in the middle third, but it's almost hard to wrap your mind around how Tchouaméni, Valverde, Camavinga, and Bellingham would get dominated in the middle third, especially in terms of intensity. So maybe we could talk about that.
Well, that all comes back to not having an out of possession approach that ever he's never coached. He wants to have the rest offense, so he doesn't have a press, and so these crazy athletes get dominated. I think it's absurd because I think this is where a lot of coaches would very easily solve this problem. Okay, there are things that maybe if you had another center back in a 9, things would get easier for Carlo. But I think most coaches would have set up a block yesterday with those 4 that would do that for a half. These guys did, even against City, we saw Pep coaches the most fancy schemes. Rodri and all these guys, Foden, when they're pressed by Camavinga or Tchouaméni or Bellingham, when they're breathing down their neck, they make mistakes, and that's because these guys are generational. I don't think it's hard to coach a mid block with this team and compress the field.
I don't think it's that Ancelotti is incapable of it. I think that again it comes back to the trade-offs that he's unwilling to make. A huge issue in terms of pressing that we've had is how high Rudiger and Militao push up the line, but there's absolutely zero pressure on the ball unless Valverde or Bellingham, or on the left side maybe Eduardo Camavinga make a 20-30 meter sprint. So again, if you're not willing to give up the, he needs to make a decision. Do you want the rest attack or do you want the high press? Right? It's not gonna buy into each other at this current state.
For sure. And if you have the rest attack, is that feeding into you playing too fast? But the thing is, you can't not have the rest attack with this team to some degree. Like, you can
But
sacrifice it at points, or can you? Or do you think you can sacrifice the rest attack
I
and
think
build more?
there's something with that Kylian Mbappe misses, and it's that with Karim Benzema in the past and then Jude Bellingham last season is if you look at our past first attacks, a lot of the time it was okay, get the ball to Bellingham, get the ball to Benzema, and then boom, you're gonna release Vinicius Jr., you're gonna release Cristiano Ronaldo or Angel Di Maria down the line. And with Kylian Mbappe and Vinicius Jr., now all of a sudden we have these two players who their first thought is make the run behind, right? So it's it's a little contradicting in that point, and it's doesn't fit necessarily maybe the style that Angelotti historically has had.
But that's where I think that is actually the number one area that I think is so bullshit. And that actually, when you have, like, I think it's just bullshit that they can't figure it out together. In that, when you actually have a winger and a striker who can both dribble and pass, then that just increases the possibilities of what you can achieve on the pitch. And the team I bring this back to is Messi, Neymar, Suarez. I always bring them up with this front three because it's like, okay, you don't have your tall target man. I guess Suarez was more physical than even Jude. Maybe Jude's taller, crashes like aerially, but Suarez like poaching and like back to goal, like tussling to get a shot off was like a more traditional nine. But even then, go watch them combine. Like, yes, Suarez was the one making the runs, but sometimes he would come short and like score crazy bangers. Like it wasn't always him making the run, even though he was the first one to make the run to open it up for Neymar and Leo. Then when they got the ball, it was all read each other's body language. Once you make your move, we'll read and react. I think that should be able to happen here. In fact, having both of them so dangerous should mean we should be able to alternate between who's the focal point and who's releasing. We should be able to confuse the defense. And here's why I'm saying this. This is what we did against City last year when we moved Rodrigo to the left wing and Vinny to striker.
Yeah.
And like that was the moment when I'm like, oh, Mbappe is gonna cook under Carlo. And I guess it only worked as a surprise in a big game, but against deeper blocks, it's more complicated because in that big game, Vinny playing striker against a block is a different story.
Yeah. I think my point with that was now that we have this dynamic of Vinicius and Kylian Mbappe, I think okay, here's a good example. Arsenal with the way they release Gabriel Martinelli a lot of the times, right? Is my point is perhaps with Kylian Mbappe and Vinicius Jr. and the style of players they are, you could get a lot of the advantages that perhaps having a traditional rest attack gives you, while still having them collect from deeper positions, which allows them to, defend deeper, or at least relieve a lot of pressure off Chouameni and Valverde, who've been struggling with these vertical jumps like we raised earlier.
That would be my solution. After looking through all the trade-offs we've talked about, I would agree because if you leave Vinny and Mbappe high up, we're gonna play too fast. You drop them into the block, the defense is good. We don't play as fast. Now it's not as easy for them. The strain on them physically goes up a little. And maybe the number of times we so easily access the space between the second, third, and the final third increases. Now, one interesting stat is that Mbappe was, at least a few weeks ago, averaging more touches per 90 and I can check that, but he was averaging more touches per 90 in the box than he did at PSG or any other season of his career. And I think it's because like early on we were uncomfortably like force feeding him the ball. And I'll check that stat now.
I definitely agree with the uncomfortable kind of forcing him the ball, because if you take yourself back to the early weeks, he was getting the ball a lot in the box, but he's struggling to create any sort of separation.
Yeah, and just pulling up the metrics right here. Yeah, so his touches are down, 41 touches per 90. Last season was 50, which was like a bit lower than years before that. 41, which is and he averages 50. And then but in the attacking third, he's at 28, he averages 31. It hasn't, like, the drop off has been in other phases, you could say. Because we have so many guys. And in the penalty box, he's averaging a career high, 10.7, highest of his whole career. He only hit 10 at PSG once, and he was at 11 some time ago too. So I think what happens there is it's obvious that we can get it to him there. But if we don't know what we're doing when we get it there, we might as well slow down build up. The only thing I would say is I don't want to slow it down so much that we stop accessing those opportunities, because I think we can start converting those accessing opportunities at a higher rate. But if he coaches the body language stuff, which I think he needs to work on off the pitch. Whoa.
You could, this is where you could maybe play around with the rhythm, for example, right? Like Julian Nagelsmann perhaps was a bit more the opposite, where his build-up was extremely quick and then it would slow down towards the final third. The Zerbi, right? They played at a really slow pace within the first phase, and all of a sudden they're just running at you. So I don't think you can play a bit slower, but again, it comes back to how are you doing that? And this is where I think perhaps, like I raised, that there are some improvements that we've seen against Barcelona and we've seen against Dortmund specifically in that second half, where we are able to, maybe control the game a little bit more in deeper phases while still being able to release Kylian Mbappe and Vinicius. It's about, creating these situations consistently rather than relying on the opposition to give you the space to do so.
Yeah, for sure. Actually guaranteeing it happens every game and being prepared for what they're gonna do. And what do you think of I guess yeah, I agree about varying the tempo. That's something that I feel like was like I should have realized this, but that's exactly what Cruz did the best, and even Modric. Like, it's not slowing it down was their default state, but they always knew exactly when to speed it up. Like, that's just something we've lost completely. It's really been hard to watch. And that's again something Pep coaches, Mikel can coach. Maybe not as smoothly or in the exact manner, but still a pretty solid build-up coach. But yeah, any further thoughts on that?
I think also then it's about how are you achieving that, right? Do you necessarily have to achieve that change in tempo with the pass, right? Valverde is a great ball carrier. Jude Bellingham and Vinicius are fantastic ball carriers. Kylian Mbappe, he's over years had a growing kind of sense of changing the rhythm on the ball. So why does that necessarily have to come from the pass? Why can't it be a situation where you're able to create them through ball carrying?
Yeah, for sure. And again, that's something Kovacic does so smoothly now at Man City. Through ball carrying, he stabilizes the team while still making the right passes. And I think what it comes down to with Carlo is that he's great at exacerbating whatever qualitative advantage you have. So if Benzema is better than the opposition center backs qualitatively, he maximizes that. If Vinicius is a better player, dribbler, and winger than everyone in the world, he maximizes that. However, on the ball, that is. But when it comes to and in the past, when the team has been good enough, things like the quantitative advantages, like having overloads, they would work out. Or I guess we don't always have overloads. It feels like under Carlo, we've dominated through mostly qualitative advantages. Like this 21-22, it was just Benz and Vinny who like cooking against, like, they weren't really overloading the box that year. And I guess even going back to Zidane, like Ronaldo, Benzema would pin more defenders. They would not. There was barely a huge quantitative advantage in the box. Even in bigger games, we just rely on the quality of their speed and movement being what gives them free. And also, Carlo doesn't rely on positional advantages. Like, the three advantages are positional, like you are in a position where the other guy can't get to you. Qualitative, where one-on-one, you're just better than the guy. And quantitative, like, hey, we have a 2v1 and you can't just guard both of them. Those are the three football advantages. That's just a way to see it, that you can create. And Carlo really only emphasizes that one, the qualitative part of it. And he works within the quantitative and positional to try and find a balance. But he's not by no means a savant with those things. And just one thing I want to bring up briefly is as a cross-sport example is like the Lakers this season. A lot of people didn't realize like what the hype was with their new head coach. And if you don't follow this, no worries, you don't have to talk about it. But the Lakers replaced Darvin Ham with JJ Redick and started 3-0, and people like were cracking jokes that LeBron wanted to hire his podcast partner when he got hired. And hey, he still has learning to do, but he's looked phenomenal, and that's because we could hear it on the podcast. He's paying attention to the margins. He's not just looking to optimize like the best traits of his players. He's looking to win in every little margin everywhere. And Carlo doesn't seem like someone who does that.
Yeah, to your Lakers point, I only really watch the Raptors in regular season. But as for in general, I think you brought up the dynamic. I mean the positional and the quantitative and the qualitative superiorities. But one thing we did really well with Bellingham and Vinicius and Rodrigo and Carvajal last season was socio-effective advantages, right? Where you kind of get the best of both worlds. Where yes, you're able to combine in a more relational matter, but at the same time, you're still able to have a reference point. And this is something we brought up in the first episode, and it still seems we haven't solved it. Who is the reference point in build-up? And in attack, we've lost the reference point. I mean, if we're gonna play this style, you're gonna have to pick one of Mbappe, Jude, or Vinicius to organize around.
For sure. And I guess and the socio-effective thing, I guess that brings us to like where we had it last season, and Carlo does know how to put the players in an environment in training consistently where they can get there. But it doesn't seem like something he I mean, he knows when it's not there and he wants to get there, but it sometimes feels like he isn't, like, as we've seen this season, he's not giving the players enough options to get there seamlessly. And the socio-effective stuff, like, Carlo's a great ego manager. He's a very, like, psychologically, he's very sound in that like he gave the players 2 days off, and I think I get why people were angry with him in the press conference, but I thought what he said about like how I've seen the first half, like, I think it was a good message for the players. Like, forget about it. You have to forget about the game. He's good at knowing when to take it easy. And yeah, he errs on the side of like more freedom, laissez-faire, relaxation, a little less stress, like in his whole approach, whether it's details, obsession, or and always defensively. He leans a little offensively. He's okay with a little bit of defensive slippage as long as you're able to hit it on the other end, unlike Zidane. And I feel like maybe sometimes he trusts in his players so much that he doesn't relate to their insecurities on the pitch. And he was a good player. He was a good midfielder, is my understanding. I didn't watch him, and he wasn't like Zidane. But my understanding is like before Zidane, he was still one of the better or best players.
Yeah, I think he was one of those players who were really good but had injuries, kind of derail his career.
Really good but had injuries. Interesting. So it feels like he doesn't always relate to the players. Like there's a deeper psychology that comes from a Pep or an Arteta where they really see every single option, pass, dribble, and they really know how to bring it down to 2 or 3, like a little wheel where you spin it. And with Carlo, he feels that's restrictive maybe. And that might be the other thing. Maybe he's really against it. Do you think he's just against it? Like, you think he's against getting to that point where he has to handhold the players?
I think right now he's at a stage of overcompensating, fitting in Kylian Mbappe. Because we've seen this last year. Last year, what we were really good at, especially against Bayern Munich, was on a more holistic team level, right? And we've seen this against Leipzig, even though it wasn't necessarily good against Leipzig, was keeping kind of positional sense, right? We implemented a lot more of positional ideas per se. I don't usually like using that word, but in this sense, it's kind of appropriate. But at the same time, within kind of these small spaces, we had relationships between between Kroos and whoever surrounding him, Rudiger or Tchouaméni, developed. In attack, it was with Rodrigo and Carvajal, and that's something we lacked this year. It seems like we lost that collective idea, and now it's almost as if we're freestyling everywhere rather than at a more individual group level.
It's crazy though how when Modric is on the pitch, all that slowly you like rub your eyes, you look again, and you kind of see a team that knows what it's doing in moments against Atletico. The first hour before the stupid stoppage was phenomenal, and it feels like you have a team that understands what it's doing um, for large stretches when Modric is there, and that's why I guess I tend to blame Carlo, because it feels like he hasn't realized like how much of that socio effectiveness you're describing came from the security afforded by Cruz, because they knew they could give it to him, and he would always give it back to them in a way where like it was they could look up, get their options. He's not playing you a pass that's hard to control with the man on you. If he's playing you the pass with the man on you, it's because he's
Yeah.
behind you and he knows you can receive it.
Like a great example is actually the Vinicius goal against Celta Vigo. That was very similar to the goal he scored against the Bayern Munich last season.
For sure. And for sure. What do you any thoughts on Jude Bellingham and his role? How would you where would you put him now in all this?
You have to maximize Jude Bellingham to an extent, and I think okay. Um, yes, we've lost, you know, Danny Carvajal, and yes, Rodrigo's kind of had a bit of injury problems lately, and so you're gonna need someone physically to help out at that end, and then of course if you move Valverde perhaps to the right side, now you have the issue down the middle. But again, this kind of comes back to: are you willing to, give up that rest attack for better performances from the whole team? Maybe get Jude Bellingham a bit more involved. And I think for Jude Bellingham, it's clearly frustrating for him, right? Being um, delegated to this role. You kind of seen him against Lille. There was that match where Vinicius took that shot. I don't remember what game that was, but he had an outburst. And I think you could clearly see he's kind of holding it in at the moment. So again, it's about on a team level how we're gonna fix this, and I think it's about trade-offs again, right? Are you willing to, my biggest issue honestly is, look, Bellingham's in that role. Vinicius is still not back on the wing, and Kylian Mbappe is, a traditional nine per se. So we've not really maximized any single one of them, and all we've done is minimize them, and we've not even maximized the team. So that's the solution in terms of, okay, if Carlo Ancelotti wants to continue this, freedom ball per se, who is he gonna maximize? Who's gonna be? Is it Vinicius like last season? Is it Benzema like before? Is it Ronaldo? Who's gonna be that guy?
Right. And he clearly wants Mbappe to be that guy, but I think he can get there if he works on the socio effective, the body language cues,
Yeah,
the relationship. I think the movement, I think it's crazy how like even with all this wrong, you go watch like every shot and offside and like run he's gotten the ball in the last like
yes.
it's ridiculous how often he gets open. Like he's always
Yesterday, the offside trap, it should not have worked. It wasn't good, frankly.
it wasn't good enough. Like it was I think it's really good relative to most teams we've ever seen, which is why I think it worked. What do you think he coached? Like, do you think they practiced? Because like, if you go look at the stats in film, they're even more aggressive than Bayern. They're at like 6.5 offsides per game, which is like two higher than the next highest in Europe's top five leagues for like 6 or 7 years or something. Which is Aston Villa last season at 4.5. So they're doing something differently to other teams. Do you think like do you think like they knew what's coming but didn't practice it? Like, do you think they didn't practice an offside jump in training? Mbappe, like Camavinga passing to Mbappe, get a Castilla backline there, get them jumping. Is that, or do you think it was Mbappe's fault?
Mbappe definitely lacks some striker instincts per se. Even when you look at when he played striker at PSG, it was very different role wise compared to Madrid. And I say that because Kylian Mbappe still kind of has this winger instinct of where he's just gonna run in a straight line, right? He doesn't really curve his run to kind of make sure it's onside. Because the goal he scored yesterday, there was no reason he couldn't have scored that if he was hidden over, um, kind of get anxious a little bit. So that is something that at least for now you're gonna have to accept if Kylian Mbappe is a striker.
I think that's something that can be coached personally. Like, I
Yeah, I
think
definitely think over time it can improve, but what are we gonna do at this current moment to maybe overcome that.
Yeah, for sure, that makes sense. And then that brings us to, if we're gonna go, do you think it's a question of? I mean, it isn't. There's no question he wants to trade it. He wants the outlet ball, but let's say he wants Vinny and Mbappe to defend starting tomorrow. You think he can make them do it? You saw that clip of Luis Enrique talking to Mbappe, telling him like, if you like lock up, if you press, everyone's gonna follow you. And obviously Mbappe didn't. I mean, I don't remember that, to be honest. Like, I watched the whole tie, but I don't remember how well he pressed against Barcelona. I just remember that he was relegated to a positional winger role. Like, it was horrible.
We
Like, Enrique used him.
we actually kind of took advantage of him, Neymar, and Messi. If you remember in that second leg at the Bernabeu.
Yes, I remember. I felt like we really took advantage of Messi the most of all of them. But in that comeback specifically, I felt like they needed to remove him. They needed Mbappe's outlet. They can't remove Mbappe. Neymar was the hardest worker of the three. But yes, we did take advantage of their front three. Um, but do you think he can work hard? Do you think it's a question? Like, I think there's no question there are coaches in the game that can make him press. I think Xavi could be one of those. I think there are coaches who Zidane is certainly another one. Zidane doesn't press, but Zidane can get him tracking into a mid block. Zidane made Ronaldo do that for a bit when he was older. But do you think like it's a question of just realizing the trade off and doing it, or do you think there'll be further hiccups if he decides them to defend, or do you think maybe he's just so offensive that he never wants them to track back? He won't see this as a solution.
With Vinicius, on the first, I think he'll be fine. Vinicius kind of someone. I think he'll do anything to win. Kylian Mbappe, again, kind of goes back to my point of I don't think he'll ever necessarily be, for example, even Neymar, right? Neymar worked pretty hard off the ball. But you can, at the very least, kind of remove his frustration whenever he works off the ball, right? So, for example, if he presses, if there's someone to back him on that press and you win the ball over, perhaps, he'll be more willing the next time to engage compared to where now you always see every, 30 or so minutes he'll make a short little sprint and then, you know, he's frustrated visibly because there's no one there. So I think, again, it buys into the mental aspect, and also there does need to be a little bit of discipline. You have to work hard, right? Erling Haaland works hard off the ball. You raise Cristiano Ronaldo. Karim Benzema worked extremely hard. Luis Suarez worked extremely hard. He needs to buy into that, frankly.
Totally. And Carlo hasn't wanted him to so far. I'm very curious to see if or when he asks him how things change. It does feel like, after talking to you, that might be one of the only directions they can go. It's just like, after a game like that, I wonder if they're focusing on defense or if they're just like, hey, how can we work with Mbappe to get him scoring more? I wonder if like their thought even goes to having him defend more, because even those offsides, like at the end of the day, but like the rest offense worked in the first half. Like, in my opinion, it worked really well. It just didn't, like, we didn't execute on the margins.
Um, yeah, I agree. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought. But yeah, I think again, with Kylian Mbappe, he's gonna have to work hard, and it is clearly the idea to build around him. I think Ancelotti kind of let it slip in a press conference where he thinks he's our best player, at least talent-wise, even maybe he's not the best performing right now. And yeah, in terms of this was my train of thought. Historically speaking, these kind of results are where you see changes with Carlo Ancelotti, right? Last year's at the Wanda, that terrible game, I think ended 3-1. The Champions League, the first one with him, not the first one with Ronaldo, but the first one in distant. It was actually, funny enough, a 4-0 against Barcelona that kind of changed things around, and that game against PSG away. So, given that Ancelotti's processes are more results based, we are more likely now, because for a lot of the season it was like, okay, we're playing garbage, we're playing like shit, but we're 3 points behind against Barca that's won all but one of their games, and we're also only 1 or 2 points behind in the Champions League off top spot. So now I think this is perhaps where he'll make a bit more changes. guessing off his press conference, I think it'll be defensively more than anything.
Sorry, I just got cut out here, but returning to our conversation to close it out, Mazen.
Yeah, so what I was saying is historically, these sort of results, since Carlo Ancelotti's processes are more results based, that, you know, perhaps the 4-0 is something that we'll see a change um, compared to whereas up until yesterday, you could say, okay, Barca's won 9 out of 10, 8 out of 9, whatever it was, of their matches in La Liga, and we're only 3 points behind. We're only, I think, 1 point behind, or maybe 3 in the Champions League top spot, right? So I think now perhaps we'll see a bit more changes in terms of, the season.
Yep, I agree. Curious to see what he does, but I agree now is when we usually changes things. I'm curious to see if he has a happy ending. Do you think we can win the league still?
It's definitely possible. I mean, look, you have to go into the Camp Nou match thinking you're going to win it. And after that, it's 3 points behind. So you don't have a lot of room for error up until probably, honestly, maybe February or March where you close that gap. But it's doable. I mean, we've seen Arsenal last season lose 4 games in a row and they still only lost the league by a point.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. Do you think Carlo does it though? Like looking at his previous teams, like the last time we didn't have a controller was 2013-14. We still had Xavi and Modric there, but obviously Xavi was no Toni Kroos. Di Maria was like a lot more like Camavinga, chaotic in terms of how he would carry it, like just aggressive player. And we leaned into the verticality. And from what I recall, we had that mid block, and we just played elite transition offense. And we didn't seem to have this issue of over circulation in deep areas or always taking the pass required. So that's my last memory. And even then we had prime Modric. So I guess like looking through his different teams, is there any precedent you would look at, or any teams in history that have these like mix of profiles, lack of a 9? Like last season, last season going into it, I compared us a little bit to Man City 2021, no striker, very elite midfield. So even without the focal point, I thought we'd win. And in the end, Joselu was key, but also the sheer amount of like non-striker like midfield options we had was key. Any like precedents or examples? And I guess my favorite is I know we don't have Suarez, but like Messi, Neymar, Suarez in terms of like how we allow the attackers to interchange and socio-effectively play off each other.
It's hard to put a reference point, but an attack, in all honesty, the reference point is last season. Look, Kylian Mbappe is an upgrade in every sense on Rodrigo. So there's no reason where you can't build off sort of those ideas. Of course, deeper phases without Toni Kroos is a little tougher, but the reference point is there, and it was last season.
The problem has been mainly that Rodrigo knows everyone socio-effectively, and Mbappe knows nobody, and that's where Carlo has to step in again. That's on him, right?
Yeah, and I think in terms of coming back and winning the league, or at the very least defending the Champions League title. Look, Carlo Ancelotti, at the end of the day, I won't question his ability with the media. So, perhaps when he says, I think the game wasn't indicative of the match that was played, the result at least, perhaps, he's just saying that to cool things down. The same way maybe when he says 4-0 last time we won the Champions League. I don't know what's going through his mind. But internally, there has to be a sense of accountability that has not been there the entire season, right?
Yep.
There has to be accountability. You have to be honest with yourself. Okay, just because Rudiger made 50 blocks doesn't necessarily mean you defended well. Just because Vinicius Jr. turned it on in the second half does not mean you played a good 90 minutes against Borussia Dortmund. And so there has to be that level of accountability, and that's how we're going to move forward.
Right, and that was there for the City second leg where he examined the trade-offs, brought him deep, but wasn't fully there maybe against Leipzig or even Dortmund in the final last year when Courtois saved our ass. And it feels like there's accountability only when we lose. That's a great point, and it will be there now. I'm definitely curious. Like this feels like then if it's either make or break this next month. He either figures it out or it ends up a bit like Benitez where after the 4-0, it just gets worse until he's sacked, which can also happen. He
I
also
think
lost. Sorry,
oh,
I would just
sorry.
add he also lost 4-0 to Atletico in February 2015, his last spell. And there was some accountability after. The squad was weaker then. But the Sergio Ramos in midfield eventually happened. He realized he had to steal it up. So I'm just curious to see what happens here.
Something we lost with Carvajal. With Carvajal, of course, you lose one of the best right backs in the world, but you also lose your only. When you look at perhaps a leader within the locker room now, you probably point to Antonio Rudiger, who's been here for maybe 2 or 3 seasons. So we've kind of lost that a lot with Danny Carvajal's injury.
For sure, Rudiger. I guess like Vinicius is now one of the like captains of the team because he's one of the like longest tenured players, and he's only 24. But yeah, for sure. And Carvalho's loss has also been problematic in build-up, where it feels like so many things that Carlo doesn't bother detailing, Carvalho figured out, like kind of like a Cruz and Modric and Benzema, where in build-up they don't put a foot wrong. And Vasquez, he can replicate aspects of it in certain phases, but he's not anywhere near as reliable. It seems like.
Yeah, and I think in terms of accountability, you could just look at the fact there was not a single press conference from a player yesterday, right? And then you perhaps compare that to the last 4-0. I think Thibaut Courtois took a lot of accountability in that game. You look at I was actually looking at an old tweet from Sergio Ramos after I think maybe it's 5-1 or 4-0, something like that. And it seems at the moment there's almost this idea that okay, you have Mbappe, you have Vinicius, you have Bellingham. That's 3 of the 5 best players on the planet. You'll solve it yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And I would just say, in that sense, the reason like yesterday for me, from at least from what I understand, and this was talked about on the members only post game show from the Bernabeu by Kian. Kian was saying that there's a lot of turmoil behind the scenes. There's like kind of what you said. I don't know if it's with him, but Jude, and then the guys who are not getting minutes, Gouler, Endrick. There seems to be a disconnect, and it hasn't come out. Is what all the press has been told in private. And it's going to start coming out after this game, is what Kian said yesterday. And that just checks out with, it seems like they're kind of upset and they're not together right now.
Sorry, if I bring this up, if you actually take it back to his Bayern stint, this is kind of how that ended. There was a lot of turmoil that was kind of building for a long, long time at Bayern Munich. And I don't remember exactly the trigger point, but it came to the point where Robin and Ribery started organizing their own training sessions with the players.
I didn't know that. What the fuck? I knew there was turmoil. I knew that they felt like he didn't pay nearly enough attention to detail, that his training methods weren't that sophisticated. And I mean, we also saw recently their players are coming out and criticizing Pintus, or like the whole Pintus branding as well, saying it's not him, but it's our individual work.
And
doing that.
What annoys me kind of about those reports more so is it's clearly there's some leak within the Madrid team that's quick to point fingers to other people, right? You always see this where maybe Orlean Tchouameni gets scapegoated a lot, right? Perhaps Eduardo Camavinga gets scapegoated a lot. Eder Militao, even Antonio Rudiger. I was surprised at the amount of scapegoating he got for someone who, frankly, for up until yesterday didn't put a foot wrong for about a year and a half. So it's I'm not a media person, so I'll take your word for that. But clearly, there is a lack of cohesion. Is that in terms of squad harmony, or is that just in terms of the idea of how we play?
Yeah, and I don't like how the players are getting scapegoated personally. I know like a lot of people blamed the players yesterday, but for me, there was one major culprit beyond that. Now that report I didn't even know this. I thought I knew, but oh my god, I guess I didn't want to realize. But so Robben, Neuer, Muller, Boateng, Lam, and important Xabi Alonso, they all complained to the Bayern board about Carlos' training methods, and they felt he didn't improve the team or the players. So Robin specifically said his son received better training with his youth team than Bayern did with Ancelotti. Oh my god! And when the players organized it on their own, Ancelotti forbade them, and they moved to a different location for those sessions. Apparently, his fitness coach would smoke in the locker room, and they didn't do enough warm ups. And so, for the first time during his tenure in Munich, before they played PSG, and PSG was the game that got him fired, if you remember, they lost 3-0. Before that game, they did video analysis for the first time, all like during his time there, or like really rigorous. And apparently, they didn't even implement it during the game. Now, I don't know, kicker. Some of this sounds like, I don't know about that. Like that sounds extreme. I feel like
I don't look. He's won 2 Champions Leagues. For some players, he's won 3 Champions Leagues with them. That's not gonna happen at Real Madrid. I don't think we'll ever reach turmoil of that point. And Bayern Munich do kind of have a reputation. You've seen it with Nagelsmann and you've seen it with Tuchel, where they get really separated with their coaching staff when things are not going too well. So I don't think he'll get to that point. But yeah, whether there's clearly some frustration. I think for us, it's probably more related to the matches, right? And players perhaps not happy with their role compared to there, where there was a complete disconnect.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to close this out here. I guess I'll summarize some of the points. But one final question here, Mazen, is do you think Xavi is the right man for this team next season?
I think probably because, look, I think there's better coaches than him in terms of his era. But coaches in terms of, tactical, maybe understanding and implementation, things like that. But the Real Madrid job and the reason why Carlo Ancelotti's been so successful is not all about, being the best X's and O's guy. And I think in terms of the complete package, you get that with Xabi Alonso. You get someone who's gonna have a lot of respect from the players. There's actually a few, right? Like Danny Carvajal, who's had played with him, and you also get a more evolved guy tactically, and I think it's a good balance, somewhat like Zidane.
Yeah, 100%. Someone like Zidane would do the job too. Jurgen Klopp is off the table. He could probably do it too on this type of team. Although I guess like he's a little too physically draining for me. I'd prefer a coach with in possession ideas so that you're not always reliant on winning duels. So I'm not a big Klopp guy in that sense. He just burns his players out. It's well documented. But yeah, and so to summarize, everyone, Carlo's not looking at the trade-offs accurately. He hasn't coached a press ever, and he's very obsessed with getting the rest offense right. So out of possession, we're defending kind of separate from the front two. That means the center backs have to jump. Midfielders have to work way harder out of possession, a lot of inefficiency in how they're defending, and our attack isn't great. So if we move Vinicius and Mbappe maybe deeper, that could be one solution. But also things like figuring out how to get our players to have more options and build up so that they're not always rushing. And bringing Vinny and Mbappe back is one way. But ending this contradictory ideas is a key for Carlo to do better going forward. And, he has a lot of credit here, but if you just listen near to the end, he did have a lot of players saying he was not improving them at Bayern. And right now, he has to improve these players and get the most out of at least one of them because it's not working for anyone right now. Mazen, anything else you'd like to add here as we close out? Any final points?
No, not really. I still think it's the point of the season you have to remain calm, but it's the point of the season where you have to have accountability and you have to seriously be self-critical because it's recoverable, but it'll only get worse if you don't admit, the things that's been going wrong.
For sure. And I think that's where we're all confident in Ancelotti. He doesn't lie to himself. Maybe we don't win with the margins we want. Courtois still has to make saves. But as we saw with City last year, he learns in some of these biggest moments. He figures it out.
I think City's a great point because, man,
not only last year, but also 3 years ago, for what it's worth. Both
I think we tied the first leg against City the year they beat us 4-0. And I remember that was like such a big celebration. It was like, wow, we really tied Manchester City because we were having a terrible season. And there was such a lack of accountability to the fact that Manchester City, that entire Champions League run, were so conservative away that their only thing was not to lose. And we improved on that, and we realized, okay, coming into this year that, you know what, 3-3 is not the end of the world, but you do have to improve on that.
Yep. We knew we had to still, like, we knew the second leg would be way harder. 3-3 felt like a loss this time. Whereas last time 1-1 felt like a win. I agree fully. And even when Fede scored, it's like, okay, like, we're not completely out of it, but damn, we messed it up. That was the vibe I got from all the players. Like, they knew those 3 goals conceded was fatal. Well, this has been a great episode. I think this is a lot of good stuff for the fans. I'm gonna want to get this out as soon as possible after the Clasico. And yeah, if you're checking this out, please like, subscribe, retweet, follow me on Twitter, Tactical Fouling. Mazin's on Twitter too. He doesn't have his handle up, but it'll be up on the website. It'll be up with the post. You'll see it. And Mazin, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. Have a great rest of the day, and I guess we'll see how things develop over the next 2-3 weeks. I think the next international break is, when is it?
Usually one in November at some point, maybe another 2 weeks.
Yeah, so I guess we'll kind of see the improvements till then. So yeah, thanks for having me on.